Yes, you read that right. The idea that Baldur's Gate 3 is worse off because it's turn-based is something that people think. And yes, it's dumb and an extreme simplification that entails a lot of stuff, but it's also something that a lot of people agree with. It's not just the most recent viral tweet that gained traction. I have seen this sentiment with this game a ton and with a lot of other games as well. And we will see this sentiment again in years to come with other games, don't worry. But hey, in the world of flawed opinions, I guess the hottest take is king. But more than you might imagine, this idea and the conversation around it is very important, and there's some lessons to be learned here. And it's something that I want to tackle with the nuance it deserves. And I would like it even more if, regardless of your opinion on the topic, you stay a while and listen, because I'm sure there's something interesting here for you to learn. While Baldur's Gate 3 is the latest target of this sort of conversation, this has been happening for a very, very long time. Back when JRPGs were very popular on the original PlayStation. Recently, we had some backlash on the other side with Final Fantasy 16 going from the JRPG roots, slowly transitioning all the way through with things like Final Fantasy 15 into the full-fledged character action game that Final Fantasy 16 is. And then we had some people complaining that it wasn't turn-based. And even the developers at Square Enix said that the reason to move into this character action game focus is to make the franchise feel more modern and more fresh to new gamers. Which, by the way, I strongly disagree with. A turn-based combat system doesn't make something feel less fresh or older. A bad one does. Just the same as Starfield doesn't feel more modern because it's a real-time first-person shooter. It feels dated because it does it badly. But the point is that this is a strong division that has existed for a very long time. It's like there's a line in the sand, people who enjoy turn-based combat and people who don't. And these sort of hard divisions on things that some gamers will touch and others will never, it just keeps drawing itself across different areas, like isometric cameras. There's even another division that people have criticized Baldur's Gate 3 for, saying that it doesn't have real-time combat with pause. We'll get into that in just a second. But this ties back into the general perception that some people have and attribute to some types of games. Like the Square Enix people said, it seems that a lot of people think that something being turn-based means that it's older or less technically complex to develop or less engaging, like it's inferior in some way inherently. When the truth really couldn't be farther from that. The gameplay systems that exist at the center of a video game are meant to be engaging no matter what. They are meant to serve a purpose, whatever purpose the designers have come up with, be that a satisfying gameplay loop, the great feeling you have when you develop a great strategy and come out victorious from a fight, or the amazing reflexes that you demonstrated in outskilling your opponent in a fast-paced PvP game. They are very different things, and designers know this, and when they're making a game, they just want to do what they choose to the best of their ability. But if you think that one thing is superior to the other, that's just your preference. And unlike the viral tweet over here, the game not being in your preference doesn't make the game worse, and if the game were in your preference, it wouldn't make it better. It would make it more approachable to you, but not better. But to develop this idea a little bit further, let's talk about that real-time combat with pause, another very common system that CRPGs have used over the years. Simply put, if Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't do this, it's because it wasn't designed to do this. A real-time combat system, even if it does have pause, is designed in a very different way and functions on a technical side much differently than a turn-based one. It's not some switch that you can just turn on or off. More importantly, it means that in the design of Baldur's Gate 3, the intention was always that every combat would require you to take those turns into consideration and think about each of them to come out victorious. I'm going to use that real-time with pause example more than the combat one because I just don't understand the real-time combat one, like turning Baldur's Gate 3 into Diablo or something, because it does bring out a problem that some people can have with the game that I think is a legitimate complaint. People are probably clamoring for real-time with pause, some for nostalgia, no doubt, but many because some of the later fights in the game can be very tedious. There are points where you are over-leveled and over-geared, especially in Act 3, and it feels like these combats are just going through the motions, but they take a very long time for something that is so simple and easy at that point. This doesn't mean that the problem is because the game is turn-based, and that it would be fixed with you having a real-time system that allows you to go on autopilot and let all of your characters decimate the very easy opposition. What it is, some of the pacing with combat encounters and the difficulty that they pose at certain points in the game is not perfect. Because Act 3 does also contain quite a few combat scenarios that introduce mechanics that take advantage of this same philosophy that's throughout the game of you should take your time with every turn throughout the entire game. It's just that some don't, and that can be frustrating. Some people will already be in a mood and be flowing through the game at this pace and have no issue with these simpler combat encounters that kind of feel more like busy work, and even enjoy them as a way of feeling how much they have progressed or how powerful they've become. Other people will find them frustrating, and that is true. They can be tedious depending on how you feel at that point in your playthrough. Baldurs Gate 3 not being perfect could shore this up. It's a difficult thing to do. Could you have a skip combat button or an auto combat with a fast forward function? Yeah, that would fix the issue. Could you rebalance these specific fights or cut them out of the game? Yeah, there's a lot of considerations to be done there as well to keep the rest of the game intact, but that's another option. And if those things were solved, a lot of these complaints for real-time combat, which are just the game is kind of too slow at points for me, would be solved. But instead of diagnosing that issue, we're over here saying, oh, I wish it were real time. But the most important thing to remark here is that the combat system being turn-based is not the issue. We really should understand that if a game is excellent at what it doesn't matter what that is. Also, why don't you take just a second and hit the like button right now, because that helps the video. If you think I'm making logical arguments of a human that has thought about a topic before, hit the like button, and that way more people can hear it. And also, it makes me really happy, thank you. Plenty of people who don't enjoy turn-based games have simply never experienced a turn-based game that appeals to them and engages them in the way that they want. They could have played mediocre ones, or ones that simply don't have their system designed with everything around it. They could also have some preconceived notions because of how many more turn-based games we had in the past, and that leads to them feeling kind of retro, when that's not true. We've had a ton of games of every kind forever, but they just evolve in different ways. On the flip side, many people are more cautious towards certain real-time genres as well, because there's just so many of them that it's easy to assume that they will be mediocre, and they often are. But there is a completely different intention and purpose behind each system, and a decision made for it. Sometimes that decision is bad, sometimes it's bandwagoning on a trend and you don't execute it well, but those are just bad games. It doesn't matter what system they chose. But it doesn't matter if we're talking about first-person shooters or third-person combat or turn-based games. There's a ton of different games that all look to achieve different things. Persona 5 functions very much like a puzzle game, where having your party prepared to counter each of the weaknesses of the opponents basically leads to an instant victory. And it's about how you execute that plan of triggering all of those weaknesses where the engagement comes from. Baldur's Gate, instead, is about having very intimate knowledge about all of your characters and what you have at your disposal, so that not only can you prepare a plan that takes advantage of it, but that you are knowledgeable enough to get out of a situation when it inevitably doesn't go the way you expected it to, which is, you know, the nature of Dungeons and Dragons. Fire Emblem is all about predicting what your opponents are capable of doing in a more chess-like fashion and calculating very carefully when to take risks or not, which is punctuated by its very famous, although now not mandatory anymore, permadeath system. XCOM is all about your positioning and failing every single 99% shot. These games all tickle very different parts of our brain because they play very differently despite all being turn-based games. And the same happens with real-time combat. From Devil May Cry to Dark Souls to Diablo to StarCraft to Starfield to Xenoblade Chronicles. These are all real-time games, but they are all incredibly different. And if you picked any of the genres that they belong to, there would be like 5 different subgenres in it. There's like 10 just for first-person shooters. On the flip side, we don't really have that many with turn-based games, which is a shame, and I think doesn't contribute to people understanding what they're getting into better, since it's basically just, it's an SRPG, a CRPG, or a JRPG, when within each of those genres there's a lot of variations. But ultimately this all comes down to the decisions and intentions made by the designers. And while I can understand why you would disregard a game just because of the type of combat system or the style that it's in, it's also our fault if we don't decide to engage in something that's out of our comfort zone to experience it. I've heard countless times, "This looks awesome, but..." And after the but, I've heard a lot of different things. I've heard, "But it's another first-person shooter, and I like third-person shooters," or "It's top-down, it's isometric, but it's turn-based," when none of these things have bearing on the quality of the game. And I would argue that if a game is excellent, it doesn't really matter in what genre it is. If you are a person who likes playing video games, you'll probably find something to love there. Maybe even because it is something you're not used to. What all of these buts have to say is that it's not in your general preference. And you can have preferences, but daring to say that a game is worse or would be better if it catered to your preference is incredibly insulting. Good games are normally designed all around the basic systems that you're going to engage with, the interactive part of the game that you're going to be playing. Developers make that decision of what the core systems in their game are going to be, and then they design the best game they can around those concepts. Saying that a developer made the wrong choice in the core systems they chose is akin to saying that they're bad at doing it. You can mask an opinion with, "I would prefer," but no. It's not the same to say, "I'm hesitant to play this game because it's in a style or in a genre that I normally don't enjoy, or I prefer other types of games," than to say, "This specific game would be better if it were completely different." As a small wrinkle, I find it hilarious that people can complain when a reviewer reviews a game that is in a genre they're not normally used to reviewing or that they're not known for doing. And whenever somebody arguments that the review is bad or that they disagree with them, it always comes up that this guy doesn't know or this girl doesn't know anything about this genre, but they said they made him review it for IGN or whatever. But on the flip side, when the game of the year comes out and it's turn-based and somebody goes, "Oh, it should be real time," we don't criticize them for not being more open and willing to engage in this. By the way, I am aware of this whole thing I'm talking about, obviously, which is why I do feel comfortable reviewing pretty much any game. It doesn't matter how much in my comfort zone it is or isn't, because it's all about how you approach it. Also, I do quickly want to say that Synth Potato deserves no hate. He's just farming engagement, and he has since then apologized after being terribly ratioed and cited Asmongolds video, which I haven't watched, but I'm going to assume I'm tackling the subject from a different perspective as the reason that he changed his mind, which also seems kind of engagement baiting, but you know, this is their job. So turn-based games, like any other type of game, can be amazing. And for a long time, I shied away from them. I missed out on games because I had that same notion that they were inferior or old or slow. It's just like uncool. And I missed out on things like the Persona franchise or Dragon Quest or Divinity Original Sin or one of my favorite franchises, Fire Emblem, for quite a long stretch of years until I got into it. Heck, the recent Yakuza Like a Dragon I was hesitant to jump into because I liked the older ones, and turns out I love the new system so much more than the previous one, and I'm incredibly excited for Infinite Wealth next year, the sequel. But I had to push myself to engage with these games and to approach them on their own terms, to understand that there was a reason that people decided to do this. And Yakuza is a great example of this, right? Because This team has shown that they are excellent at doing real-time combat. So their decision to make it a turn-based RPG was not because of lack of technical ability or talent on the team to execute this, or knowledge of how to make a really good real-time combat brawler. It was because they considered that it was more true to the vision they wanted to give players to make it a turn-based RPG, and I completely agree with them. I believe we are currently living in the golden age of gaming. We have the highest quality of games and the highest variety of games. And I think turn-based games in general, not even just CRPGs thanks to Baldurs Gate 3, are picking up steam and making a comeback. And I hope that we get a lot more of them. I hope we get a great string of releases within the turn-based genre that makes people willing to engage with them and discover that they aren't old, they aren't boring, they aren't uncool. It's just that sometimes we're very stuck in our own ways and we don't know how to express that difference of opinion except with dumb things like, the game would probably be better if it were combat, real-time combat based. I don't know what voice I'm doing. Please do not be offended. But I hope my thoughts and ramblings on this topic have been useful or given some perspective on how we should evaluate games and how we should be open-minded towards them, and just how dumb some of these arguments can really be. And if you did enjoy it and you want to hear me ramble on more things or check out some of my guides, reviews, and impressions that I do on all of the latest games, go ahead and subscribe. Also leave a comment, it's good for the algorithm. Tell me how you personally feel about the topic, if you've had a journey of rediscovering genres like I did, and if you have nothing better to say, just say that Lae'zel is my favorite frog. I will heart every comment that says Lae'zel is my favorite frog, I promise. I've been Mugthief, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon.